Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the cheap underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now here's your host, David Hinojosa.
Welcome to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, David Hinojosa, and today I'll be talking with Dr. Mitch Prinstein on his latest book, Popular: The Power of Likability in a Status-Obsessed World. Dr. Mitch Prinstein is a distinguished professor of psychology and neuroscience. He is also the director of clinical psychology at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he has studied popularity for over 20 years. He and his research have been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, CNN, Time Magazine, New York Magazine, Newsweek, Reuters, and many others. Dr. Prinstein, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I found your book extremely interesting. I think this is a topic we can all relate to. And I just have a question. How did you end up studying popularity?
It's funny. I was interested in popularity ever since I was a kid. I just found it so fascinating. But when I got to graduate school and started doing research on it, I was pretty shocked. I thought that popularity would be important for kids. I didn't realize that popularity would have such long-term effects on the rest of our lives, not just on how we do in our social relationships, but at work and in our health even. That was really fascinating for me.
Wow. Okay. And what can readers learn from your book, or what can they expect from your book?
Well, I hope that readers can feel a lot better about whatever they experienced growing up in terms of their own popularity. You know, the book gives a really good guide for how to recognize the difference between different forms of popularity, and also how to realize that our society is kind of changing in ways where we need to be armed to help our kids in ways that none of us experienced growing up. It's a very different world that now focuses on status popularity rather than likability. Last, I think that it'll be good for folks who want to understand how to change their popularity and be a little bit more successful by being more likable in the world.
I see. I remember reading something, now that you're talking about that, I remember reading that a lot of people think that whenever they, they were not very popular in high school, but then they think in college they can just press a reset button, they can reinvent themselves. Is that true?
Yeah, to some extent that can be true. You know, there's the kind of popularity that's based on status is really that adolescent version of being cool and everyone noticing you and being really influential, and that really could change in college. At least it used to, before the world of social media, where there's now this lifelong persistence in kind of caring about status. That's different than likability, and the kids who were disliked as young kids might be experiencing difficulties being liked as they grow up, unless they understand how they can change that.
I see. You talk about status and likability as two different forms of popularity. Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between both of them?
Yeah, so since status is the kind of popularity that's more based on that visibility and being so influential, it really is contrasted with likability, which is the extent to which people really enjoy spending time with you. They find you fun to be with. You make them feel good about themselves, and you're really interested in making other people feel included. That's really some of the core components of being likable. That's important because being likable gives you benefits for the rest of your life.
I see. And can both be achieved? I mean, can somebody have status and likability at the same time throughout, or is this something that are these mutually exclusive, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can have both. It's a little hard to do. About 30% of those who have high status are also highly likable. But it's hard for a lot of others who are high in status because some of the things that it takes you to become high in status might be the exact things that make it hard to be likable.
I see. That's very interesting because I remember reading one of your examples where students are asked to name the most likable person and the least likable, or the most popular and the least popular, and usually the most popular person was also the least liked. How does that come into play?
Well, one of the ways that not just humans, but a lot of species kind of will lead to higher status is the more aggressive you are, because by being dominant and making others lower, it actually increases your position on the totem pole. But that's very different than likability. In fact, being aggressive is the best way to become disliked by those same people. So that's one of the reasons why you see that those bullies or those mean girls, can really be high in status, but they can be really disliked at the same time.
Yeah. And do people generally strive for likability, or do they generally gear towards getting status?
Well, research has been done some really cool things, like one study that looked at diaries of young kids as they were growing up in the early 1900s, and then looked at those same kinds of diary entries closer to today. And I think the answer to your question is it depends when in history you're asking it, because it used to be that people really were pursuing likability, and we all valued that and rewarded that. But that's all changed pretty dramatically not too long ago, where now kids will say that what they want more than anything is to have the most Instagram followers and to be the most famous. That's status.
So, because of social media, people nowadays are gearing towards status as opposed to, 50 years back, they were gearing more toward likability.
Yeah, it seems like it has something to do with social media, something to do with reality TV, and even before that, even the 24-hour news cycle, some people are saying, and really changed the perception that we have. So popularity suddenly seemed like something accessible. That 24-hour news cycle had to change the media. Suddenly we had to fill a lot of airtime with stories, and the journalists started to tell stories about regular people and as a narrative device to kind of help tell the stories of the news. But that changed things. Over time, people started seeing people more like them on TV, and it made people, some argue, think that they wanted to have that level of fame. Everyone wanted that 15 minutes. Reality TV and social media might have been an expression of that.
And now that you're talking about that, I remember reading in your book, the media is not just, and I quote, and the media is not just a vehicle that gives us access to our high-status peers, but it's a high-status peer itself. Getting attention from the super peer is a major sign of status and a guarantor of huge social rewards. And I think that has to do with what you're saying, right? The social media and just the media in general are creating this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of ways that the way we treated the cool kids in high school is the way that we treat those in the media today. And it's interesting, at the level of our brains even, it seems that we get a response from the way that we interact with those high-status folks in a way that makes it pretty addictive, but also a little bit dangerous. Sometimes we put too much credibility, we assign too much credibility for those that are really high status, even if they don't have the expertise for what they're talking about. But just because they seem like a celebrity, we listen to them, we copy them, and we're really powerfully influenced by them.
So, with that said, are we wired to seek popularity? Is that why we go after, or we talk about these celebrities and these high-status people? Are we wired to seek that popularity?
Yeah, we totally are. So there's a part of our brain that is a reward center. It's the place where we get the pleasurable feeling that we might get from recreational drugs even. And that part of our brain is activated just by talking to, or even looking at someone who's high in status. We are hardwired to care about who's the most central in our herd because our bodies are protecting us from getting excluded from the herd.
So our us seeking popularity also is rooted on our sense of community, our sense of protection, all of these components, right?
That's right. And that's why the minute that we think that we might not be popular, it triggers all these responses in our bodies that we're only just now learning about, things that actually affect our DNA and our health.
how does how would they affect our DNA and our health?
So research now shows that at the minute you think that you might be excluded, your body sends out the same signal that it sends out when you're in strong physical pain. It's a signal that makes you immediately change what you're doing to try and stop that exclusion. One of the things that happens downstream of that is that it turns on parts of your DNA that are expecting that you might get injured. So think about it. If you're, thinking back to about 60,000 years ago or so, if you were kicked out of the herd, there's probably a really good chance that you would be attacked by a woolly mammoth or something, right?
Yeah.
So our bodies were built that way, and now expecting that you're about to get your arm bitten off, your body activates an inflammatory response, because inflammation would help you protect against the infection of your arm being eaten off. Well, today we don't get that same response in the real world, but our bodies don't know that. So they activate this big inflammation response that leads to all kinds of inflammatory diseases like lupus, etc. So many of the diseases we face today are based on that inflammatory response.
Wow, that's extremely interesting. That's one of the things that I found out reading your book, that it can popularity changes our DNA just by doing certain things. You also mentioned that popularity can determine our faith. How so?
In terms of our mortality, do you mean?
Well, just whether if we'll be successful later on in life, and so on and so forth.
That's right. Yeah, when we experience popularity, when we're likable among others, it changes our world. People who are well liked are given more opportunities. Whether you're a kid and that's an extra opportunity to go to another birthday party, or you're an adult and it's an opportunity to shadow somebody on a new training kind of session, each of those opportunities is a time that we learn something new. So the more we learn something, the more competent we are. We learn more social skills, we get more popular, and the cycle continues. But the reverse is very damaging. If you're unpopular, if you're disliked, you lose out on those opportunities. While everyone else is learning, you're not. That makes you do worse, get more unpopular, and the cycle is a downward spiral instead.
I see. Well, touching on that subject, you mentioned sometimes there's a shift from children when people are when they're at a young age, and then going into adolescence, when they're popular when they're kids, and then when they're going into adolescence, that popularity shifts into unpopularity. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting and sad for people who are high achieving, because being smart is something that makes you really popular when you're a young kid, because parents and teachers really like it when someone is working hard at school and they seem to be intelligent. And when you're young, you think that you basically do whatever it is that your parents and teachers want you to do. And if they like you, then all the kids like you too. But in adolescence, our bodies are primed to make us want to become more autonomous. And for that, our brains actually are designed to make us much more interested in our peers, and to automatically think that our parents have become lame at around the time we become 12 and 13. Well, that means that anything that our parents and teachers liked, we start to not like. So because those high-achieving smart kids are doing exactly what adults want them to do, now the peers turn on them, and they don't like them anymore because they seem too adult-oriented and not peer-oriented enough.
I see. And is there any way that, does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy in the end, or can that change with time? Well, what can people do to change later on?
Well, there's been really interesting research that says that in adolescence, there are some kids who are high achieving, but they don't talk about how hard they're trying to get those good grades, and that makes all the difference. It's not that they get poorer grades, but it's that they don't talk about trying as hard. In adulthood, though, becoming more likable can be as simple as recognizing how the things that you've experienced as a kid might be biasing you to see the world in a way that kind of confirms your worst fears from your adolescence, and changing that. And that's the way to change your experience. There's a lot of research that suggests that those who are unpopular kind of walk into a situation automatically expecting that they might get rejected again, even when there's nothing objectively to tell them that that might happen.
I see. Basing my next question on what you just said, it was very interesting to me to find out that whether you were popular or unpopular in high school, that kind of follows you through adulthood. However, no one's really talking about that. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, 95% of people were not the most popular people in high school, and it's a hard time, and I think a lot of people are happy to not talk about that and assume that all of that is in the past. But the research shows that it's not totally in the past. The level of popularity we had as young kids, it's literally changing what we see with our own eyes today. There's some cool research that showed people a video of a social interaction, and they showed it to people who were popular in their pasts or not, and they found that they actually saw different things in the video. It suggests that in real life, we're either tuned into those things that are just like the rejection we experienced growing up, or we're tuned into those things that remind us of our popularity growing up. We continue to see the world in a way that matches the experience that we used to have. And we now can see in the brain exactly why that happens.
You're talking about the video where the three dots, right? The green dot, the red dot, and the blue dot, and they're trying to go into a square box, or a square rather, right?
That's right. There's a research study that looks at, there are a couple of different ways you can test this, but one of them was to show people a very simple video of these dots kind of going around in a circle and then ask folks, what did you see? And in that particular instance, everyone was able to see the same thing, but they interpreted it very differently. The kids that were rejected said that they saw those dots fighting with each other and rejecting one another, but the people who grew up as popular said that they saw those dots playing with each other. It's amazing how much our past changes the way we interpret our present.
And yes, I completely agree. I remember that quote you wrote down from, I believe her name is Anais Nin. We see things as we see ourselves, right?
That's right, exactly. And that's the power of popularity. That's why it continues to affect our lives so much today, because sometimes we're still seeing the world around us as if we were 16. Then we're seeing the world around us based on who we are today.
Now, do children experience popularity the same way adults do?
Well, it used to be pretty similar. It used to be that young kids emphasized really likability, and who was most popular were the people that engaged in really likable kinds of behaviors. It used to be that adults would get through adolescence and return back to that valuing of likability, but not so much anymore. The world has made us all perpetual adolescents in a way where we're still caring about who's the most famous and cool and has the highest status, instead of prioritizing likability the way we did when we were so young.
Yeah. Now, talking about, again, going back to the whole status popularity, you mentioned that we tend to look down on people who seek status. Why do you think we tend to look down on those people when we ourselves are actually looking for status and popularity as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. We really do have this automatic response to people who are high in status, but one of the things that gives you high status is to make it seem like you don't care so much about your status, to make it seem like you're laid back and easygoing. People who spend too much time trying to get status, that actually becomes a turn off. So there are already people that we might not like very much because likability and status are so hard to have at the same time. But when it looks like someone's trying to get more status, we tend to resent them all the more. So these status seekers actually it backfires on them.
So it backfires on them. Those you're seeking status, but people, just tend to look down on you. Uh, but I think it's a little contradictory, isn't it?
Well, we tend to dislike those people who are really seeking status. It might work; they might get more status and attention, but it's not positive attention, and we tend to not like them very much because they're so brazenly seeking this kind of higher status.
Now, are these the people who act like alphas all the time, or are these people who surround themselves by artifacts that, display status, or does this go across the board in any type of status-seeking behavior? Or
Yeah, exactly. It's the people who are really aggressive, the people who try and demonstrate how powerful they are, to try and make themselves constantly seem strong. And that ends up being really powerful and working for anyone who feels like they are somehow at a disadvantage, anyone who feels neglected, or anyone who feels like they are unfairly on the lower side, the lower end of that totem pole. They will gravitate towards that person who's portraying themselves as strong and high status very, very quickly. And it's a very natural phenomenon that happens even with non-humans. And it's something that we see happen with humans too when it comes to high status people.
now, is that a reason why people tend to seek so much status? Is there something within them that drives them to keep looking for that status? What are they trying to fulfill? What are they trying to fill?
Well, for the non-human animals out there, you're trying to seek status because you want to have a mating partner and you want to have access to food and resources. But we're not those animals. We're humans, and we don't need to search for that kind of status in most parts of the world, right? We have access to, partners and food and things like that. That's why our species has often valued likability so much more, because we're looking for real human connections, which is what comes from likability. So that's what's happened, though, is that some people who don't feel like they were very popular, they're looking for a quick way to feel more popular, and they accidentally pursue status rather than pursuing likability.
I see.
That's not a good thing. Pursuing status leads to a lifetime of disappointment and never feeling satisfied, research says.
Yes, I remember reading that on your book, and I found it quite interesting because that's what you see a little bit more often. You see people surrounding themselves by things that represent status or acting in ways that are dominant, and they're trying to get that status from others, or just surround themselves by it. Another thing that I found interesting, and this is leaning into what we just talked about, you teach popularity at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, right?
That's right.
Okay, and I remember one of the activities, reading on one of the activities on the T-shirts, the T-shirt activity that you do, I believe, every time you teach this course. Could you tell us a little bit more about this and the reactions?
Sure. In the class, we try and give people an idea of why it is that popularity can have such a long-term effect on our lives. And one of those reasons why is because popularity doesn't just affect how people treat us, but it affects the person that we become. And the way that we demonstrate that is have everyone record what their behaviors and feelings are like during a day when they're wearing whatever T-shirt they normally wear. But then we all, as a class, design a really loud T-shirt. It's neon green or something. And when 200 people on campus are all wearing the same loud T-shirt, we're guaranteed that everyone on campus will treat us differently for a day. They laugh and they smile and they come over and ask us what this is all about. And of course, that's to be expected. But what the kids never expect in the class is how much they change. Because they were treated so well for a day, they find that they're smiling more, they're participating in class more, they're feeling more bold and extroverted sometimes a little bit more. And that kind of experience, they realize, would change their entire life if they were treated that way every day. If every day they had the opportunity to see just how well people treated them and how good it made them feel, they realize, what was it like? What would it be like if they had that experience throughout their whole lives, and how would they have grown up in a different way? And that's what the experiment demonstrates so remarkably powerfully every year we do it.
Yeah, I remember reading on that, and I thought that was a very interesting activity that you did. And what is the most interesting thing that students learn about that one activity? Over time, what is the one thing that they always tell you? This is what I didn't know. Now I know this because of this activity.
They say that your popularity and the experiences you have from it, it's based on a give and take process in the world. It's not just that the way we're treated, we have to feel victimized or powerless against that. We are in control of creating the world that we live in. If we act in positive ways, other people will act positively back towards us. But if we enter the world expecting rejection, that's exactly what we'll get.
That's very interesting. I really liked reading about that, and I thought that was, and I can totally see it once this activity becomes. You do this activity, and you're absolutely right. If you act positive, you're going to get positive behaviors in return. Now, what is the most interesting thing about popularity that you found in your 20 years of research?
Well, I think it's fascinating how much popularity plays a role in so many different domains. I mean, we see these same dynamics happen at work as what we see in our community, as what we see when we were kids. We never really leave the halls of our high school, so to speak. Those same dynamics are not just important for kids, and it affects how they grow up, but it continues to play out in every context we are. This is a process and an important dynamic about who we are as humans that we're not talking about, but it is part of every interaction that we experience all day long and ultimately our happiness.
Now, I see. And could you tell us because popularity, like you said, it affects from early childhood onto adult life. What can parents do to help their kids as far as this topic goes? Is there anything that parents should do or shouldn't do to help their kids out in regards to popularity?
Absolutely. I talk in the book about a number of different things that parents can do either to help their kids avoid the consequences of unpopularity, because no one wants to imagine their kid going off to school and being teased all day. That's just awful. I also talk in the book a little bit about the ways that parents can help those kids who are victimized to not suffer the psychological consequences, the ways that we talk with our kids about popularity, and the skills that we help them develop even when they're very young can have a huge impact on the lives that they lead, not just in school, but then for decades later.
I see. Is there any misconception do you think people have about popularity?
Yeah, I think people think that it's just one thing, and it's not. It really is this difference between being likable, which is a really good thing and worth pursuing, and having high status, which is shown to be related to all kinds of negative outcomes later in life. And I think that people think that popularity is something that we don't have to talk about or think about anymore after high school, and all the research shows that that's just not the case. It's actually really relevant for us our whole lives.
I see. And do you have any final thoughts on this interview, Dr. Prinstein?
I thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this, and I hope that people all can feel better about the experiences they had in high school by reading the book.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today, Dr. Prinstein. I look forward to reading more of your books, and I wish you the best of luck in your future research.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We've been talking to Dr. Mitch Prinstein on his book, Popular, The Power of Likability in a Status-Obsessed World, a very interesting, insightful, and engaging book on popularity. I want to remind you that you can always catch us on YouTube on Good Books Radio. I'm your host, David Hinojosa. Thanks for listening.